very much, Jason. So we're talking today about getting better adversarial skills within your team using different tools that are available right now. Nothing that is brand new or is in any way considered to be unusual, but that you'll definitely have the ability to take advantage of. So let's jump into it. So there are a lot of questions that are coming up in the cybersecurity world today, especially with the number of attacks that have made the news recently and the targeting that's going on in different industries that we're definitely seeing. So a lot of board members and senior executives and business decision makers are asking, how does the number of people that we have working in cybersecurity, or the lack of the number of people we have working in cybersecurity, impact our overall security posture? And of course, the answers are that, generally speaking, the more people you have, the better the posture is going to be. But that leads to a secondary issue, which is that we do still have a skill shortage. We'll talk about that briefly in a moment. And that means, how do we get more knowledgeable, experienced security professionals when it's very difficult to find those people? And finally, that leads to, how can we encourage the people that we've got to expand their knowledge base, to expand their skill set, to grow into more senior positions, because it's very difficult to get them from the outside world. And most of this is being urged on by two factors. One is, of course, that we are seeing a lot more very public attacks happening in the news these days. It's good from an awareness perspective. It's very bad because there are more attacks going on that are much more high profile. The second thing is that while the number of security professionals who are available with the right experience has grown, the need for those professionals has also grown. And so we're still at having only about 70% of the total number of experienced cybersecurity professionals that the business world as a whole needs. And that is a big problem, because the supply is still lagging behind the demand. And that makes things harder for HR teams, makes things harder for security teams, makes things harder for businesses overall. But there are things that we could do to kind of help address this. So let's start with a poll question. What skills, from a cybersecurity perspective, do you find are lacking most? I know most of us have at least these things covered in some way, shape, or form, but which ones do you think are lacking most? We'll give folks a few seconds to go ahead and answer that.
Let me just run this poll for you here, guys. So positive trends reports, is that the one that you're looking for? Or are you looking, where are you?
Skills are lacking in the organization. It's the one that matches what's up on the screen.
Yeah, we don't have that one actually lined. So actually, folks, if you can actually just kind of, in the comment box here, please put your answers in there. So poll question, what skills are lacking most in your organization? Number one, skills to optimally configure security technology. Number two, threat hunting skills. Number three, incident management skills. And number four, offensive ethical hacking skills. Let's see what's coming in here. 2 and 4, yep. 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Clearly threat hunting skills coming in there, Mike. Yep.
Yep, lots of 2s, some 1s and 4s, but the majority of people are saying 2, and that is exactly what we would expect, that the majority will be in 2 with a higher potential in 4, and that's normal, because while there are a lot of people that can do optimization and configuration on the defensive side, and where there are a lot of people who, again, on the defensive side are doing incident management, where we see quite a bit of lag is in offensive security teams, ethical hacking, threat hunting, threat analysis, those kind of things. So that's kind of in line with what we were expecting. And again, I'll apologize that we had misconfiguration on the poll question there. So with that in mind, we could start talking about how the shortage of skills affects organizations, because as you're seeing through your responses in the polls, the vast majority are saying that offensive cybersecurity professionals are where things need a bit of help. And that leads to some really specific things. We have increased stress because the workloads on the defensive team are growing into areas that they're not very familiar with, they're not very comfortable with. This push to rapidly train lesser experienced security pros, which can lead to gaps in knowledge and other issues. difficulty in really understanding whether or not the technology you have is working the way you hope it is, or what other technologies you need to put in place. Of course, it increases the risk of human error. Whenever you have more people doing, same number of people doing more things, you end up with rush jobs that can lead to errors and misconfigurations. And if they're spending most of their time putting out fires that aren't uh, incident detection and remediation related, like they're trying to optimize or find the new product or get things set up and deployed and configured, then that's going to take away from incident detection and response or remediation. So the question is, how do you get the talent that you need? That is the big question, but it always comes with a sub-question. We're talking about the world of cybersecurity and business, and that sub-question is, of course, how do we do it on a budget? Because we're all constrained by budgets. It doesn't really matter what's going on in the world, a bit more so now for most of us, but there are always budgets to contend with. So start with the basics. First, you want to do things like identifying what talent you have and where can you streamline things without detrimentally affecting the security posture of the organization. How can you get more team members involved, and how can you make sure that those team members don't get burnt out? Let's look through those basics and let's see, if we could be of some help with tips and ideas on how to go about doing these things. So identifying current talent. Not every offensive cybersecurity person or even defensive cybersecurity person needs to be an expert level resource. What do I mean by that? Some people in the organization should have several years of real world experience. They potentially should have degrees and certifications as well. That's going to be a mix. In some cases, you want people who have all three. They have a degree, they have certs, they have experience. In some cases, you're going to want them to have just a lot of experience if they don't have one of the other two things. But not everyone needs to have all three. Not everyone needs to have a high level of expertise. You want a good mix because you want people who are going to be learning and you want people who are going to be leading. They need to be varied. These teams of cybersecurity people need to be varied. And that is where we were going back to that poll question, that for most organizations, the majority, if not all of the members of the cybersecurity team are defensive cybersecurity experts. That's not a bad thing to have, but without somebody who can think like an attacker, you end up defending against things that may or may not be an actual threat to the environment. The most prominent example of that, vulnerability scanner could say that you have 500 things that need to be patched, but without somebody who is skilled in offensive technology, you're not going to really be able to easily figure out which of those are urgent patches versus patches that we could schedule over time. Understand that different people have different types of focus. They have different strengths, different weaknesses. Some people may have a better aptitude for the defensive end of the spectrum. Some people may have a better aptitude toward the offensive end of the spectrum, but they were hired as a defensive cybersecurity analyst and they don't get to do the things that are really their strength. So realize that different people may have different strengths and that the talent you need may be there. It just needs to be developed. And provide flexibility. This goes along with the previous one, in that if you discover that someone has a strong aptitude for offensive cybersecurity, have that flexibility to allow them to grow into that position. And that is something that is lacking in a lot of organizations. There are rigid structures. This is the job you were hired to do. And we try not to do it in the IT world, but we still have that sort of legacy from growing out of mainstream business and business technology, that we do tend to look at job responsibilities and job descriptions and hold people to them. It's not a bad thing overall. Again, there's a fine line here, but having that flexibility to allow people to grow into roles where they might be better suited can help solve some of these problems, because you may find that you have a diamond in the rough and that they can be brought to fill in a gap within your team. Streamlining. This is about theories like automation, not necessarily artificial intelligence and machine learning, although they can be a very big help in this world. But we also need to think about what types of methodologies are repetitive, what types don't change. Those things can be automated. And that automation can mean fewer people can do more things without getting overwhelmed. Protocols can be developed by senior folks that can be executed by junior folks. The senior teams can create testing protocols, for example. Those who have the skill for offensive cybersecurity can create penetration testing protocols that can be safely executed by junior staffers. Again, spreading that workload out to more people and really allowing everybody to play to their strengths. And tests can be run by everyone. So defensive team members can run offensive tests from time to time, especially if they're looking to troubleshoot or enhance a particular system. And so streamlining is more than just handing more things off to AI and ML, which is something that is a useful technique, but not a panacea for everything that we're dealing with, but also about finding ways to automate operations, to allow different members of the team to work together as a subunit so that they can accomplish more with the same number of people. It's also not about reducing staff. I know that's usually where we go when we talk about streamlining, but frankly, there aren't enough people who do this to begin with. So we want to keep the staff there, and we want to make it so that they can do more without getting overwhelmed, and that they can safely automate by having senior folks who are vetting and creating, and junior folks who are performing and correlating and learning while they do it. Understand that progress here is key. The cybersecurity world changes almost hourly. It's an unfortunate reality that we've seen evolving over the last several years, but we need to progress. And that not only, that progression is not only in the types of attacks we're seeing, but in the way that people in our world need to work. So leveraging senior talent to help junior talent solves multiple different problems. One, it spreads the workload out, as we were talking in streamlining. Two, it gives those junior folks a reason to show up every day. They're getting to do things that are cool and interesting and things that they may not normally be exposed to. Same goes for leveraging offensive teams to help defensive teams, and vice versa. Your junior staff are going to learn by doing. We could send them to training courses, and that's still a very good option that's on the table. But if they can learn through their day-to-day tasks, the actual work that they're doing, it reinforces those lessons. It reinforces why they're doing what they're doing, because they're learning what impact it has and what these tools do. And the senior staff are right there. Even though it may be a small number of senior staff, they are there to assist when a junior staffer sees something that they don't necessarily understand. And building the next generation of staff is what this is all about. By allowing the junior staff to be an active part, by allowing them room to learn, they are going to grow into the next generation of the senior staff that you need. And there is a tendency, especially in the security world, the digital security world, to keep people from accelerating their careers, because then they will get recruited and they will leave my organization, and then I have another hole to fill. There's always a danger of that. However, we can't let that danger paralyze our teams. The junior staff need to learn, and they're going to learn whether we help them or not. And if they learn within our environment, on our tools, on our systems, the likelihood will be that they will want to stay where they are comfortable. And so they will grow into the next set of senior engineers, augmenting the senior engineers you already have who are not enough, and they will want to stay right where they are. And that's critical. It's a bit of a difference that we see in many other areas of business, in that in technology, people want to stay where they're comfortable. And if they know my systems and they know my tools, they're going to want to stay with my company. So I need to give them that path to grow. And that leads to our last point, which is allow the team to grow organically. That comes back to flexibility. If someone is in a defensive role, but they have the aptitude and desire to be in an offensive role, and they need both, you know, we can't just say, well, you kind of like offensive, so we're going to make you do that. But they both show the aptitude for it. They're learning these things from doing them, and they're learning them properly, and they're getting the hang of it, and they're good at it. We need to give them the opportunity to move into that role. That is going to both help with having, more people who could do the more advanced tasks, but it's also going to make them want to stay where they are with your company, with this organization. So organically grow that team. Promote from within when people show aptitude and drive and the ability to do these other things. Let them try to do them. And if they can do them successfully, acknowledge that and start moving them up in their career path. And while you're doing this, the most important thing is to watch for burnout. When we looked at cybersecurity professionals, the number one reason they leave the job they're in is they get burnt out. And burnout can happen at any level of expertise, from intern to junior to senior, but it seems to happen for the same sets of reasons. Senior staff get discouraged very quickly by large amounts of repetitive work. That is the number one complaint. I need to run the same exact test on 800 different systems. That is not something I like doing. It's boring, it's repetitive, I don't want to do it. And if I keep having to do it day in and day out for months and years, I'm going to leave. So that is a major area of burnout for senior staff. Junior staff gets discouraged when they think they're stuck in a dead end. If they don't see a career path, if they don't see the ability to learn new things, they get discouraged. They start to get burnt out on the day-to-day, reading the sim logs and analyzing the reports from the EDR system yesterday, every single day. Don't get me wrong, on these two, every professional is going to know that they have to do some of this stuff. But they want to know that they're going to also be able to focus on things that they enjoy. And you've got to balance that. Otherwise, they're going to get burnt out very quickly. Defensive teams, blue teams, get burnt out when they have to also do red team stuff where it is not what they do for a living, where they don't have an aptitude for offensive. They don't really have the wherewithal to think like attackers effectively. We can all think like attackers, but it's not something they know it's not something that they do effectively. They specialize in defensive. So requiring them to do offensive work often feels oppressive to that group, and vice versa. Having the red team folks tweaking the anti-malware systems day in and day out is going to make them get disillusioned and get burnt out. So the bottom line is, while we all know this is work means something specific, work means we're going to have to do some things that we don't necessarily like to do, if we can focus on the things we enjoy doing, if we can focus on tasks that allow us to grow in our knowledge, in our career, in our chosen path of blue or red or purple, as the case may be, there is a much lower likelihood that we will get burnt out. And so as a cybersecurity manager or director or VP, the goal is allow people to do what they like in addition to doing what they know they have to do, and allow them to grow. And that's going to help ease the burden of burnout. The number one reason why the senior staff leave, the number one reason why the junior staff give up. All right, so we have a second poll question, but I don't exactly know if it's the same one that Jason has. So Jason, do you know if this is the one you actually have?
It doesn't look like this is one either, unfortunately.
Okay, so we'll go through this too.
Some different ones. So let's do this too, yeah. Use the chat feature, folks.
Yep. Basically, the question is, which of these statements do you agree with most? Hands-on experience is more important than certs. Hands-on experience and certs are, number two is certifications is more important than hands-on, the opposite of number one. 3, they're equal, or 4, we don't have any opinion on the matter. And we'll give folks a few moments to chime in. And I also see there's some questions coming up. We'll get to those. Do not worry.
Lots of 1s and 3s coming in here, Mike.
Lots of 1s and lots of 3s. And that is usually where we see the customers that I work with as well, where either they want the hands-on experience, and if you don't have 8 years of experience in whatever technology we're using, you can't work here, or you have to have a CISIP, or you have to be a certified ethical hacker, or you can't work here. And having standards is good, but also keep in mind that some people will have learned by the book and some people have worked hands-on. Both of those are people that you want to have in your organization, because remember, not everybody has to be at the same level. We can help get them to that other level. So keep in mind that these standards are not bad things to have, but you should also be looking at some folks who may not specifically look at experience or explicitly rule people out because of certifications. As long as you are looking at some of the others, then things will be okay, and you'll get a nice, good mix of people. So what are the majority of organizations missing in getting their staff more hands-on experience, more learning time to get those certifications, more ability to grow in their career and in their path? Well, we here at Cymulate, as you might guess, think that tools like continuous security validation will help. And there are other vendors who make this, so this isn't something that applies explicitly to Cymulate, although we do make continuous security validation platforms. But CSV platforms have specific benefits when it comes to organically growing your staff and letting people do what they're good at and all the things that we've been talking about up to now. First off, it enables orgs that may not have advanced, experienced offensive cybersecurity teams to be able to simulate adversary actions, to think like attackers. And that means you're going to find those diamonds in the rough. You're going to find people on the blue team who have an aptitude for this and have a desire to do this while still doing it safely. And that's key. It's got to be done safely, especially where you don't have senior folks in that area. So leveraging a tool that can do that safely will allow you to, one, have adversarial simulations going on, and two, start to find the folks within your organization who have a desire and an aptitude to do this kind of thing. Where you have experienced professionals, they can now focus on the direct, the interactive tasks that cannot be automated. Traditional penetration testing is one great example of that. It's almost impossible to automate that safely. So if we could take all of the automatable offensive stuff and make it actually automatable and running, the experienced teams can create those protocols, and then every member of the team can help execute those protocols. That frees up the senior team to look at the collated information from the automated testing and then plan and execute the more interactive components of offensive cybersecurity. So everybody gets to do stuff that they will enjoy, where they will enjoy it, and it's done safely. It's controlled by a tool that's not going to let them hurt the organization or themselves, and they're learning. Automation can also allow all staff in the tech division to perform a lot of this repetitive work. So that includes junior team members in the security area, as we've been speaking about, but it also means blue teams. They can be as much or as little part of this as they are comfortable with. And hopefully they're going to be comfortable being a significant part of this. Not the entire thing. There's going to be a lot that the blue team's really not suited to do, but there's also a lot that they can do, especially with response training and drills and, you know, purple team exercises. And so these tools can help safely allow that blue team member to be part of it. The infrastructure team, the compliance team, these are folks who do have understanding of cybersecurity, at least in general. And so allowing them to be part of this through tools like continuous security validation means more people taking care of these responsibilities safely. Again, I always focus on it's got to be done safely. If they're just being given open source tools and saying have fun, things are going to go very wrong very fast. But if it's a controlled environment where they could do these things safely, you can bring in the compliance team, you can bring in the infrastructure team, of course you can bring in the cybersecurity blue teams, the defensive teams, and now you've got a lot of people doing this kind of testing and validation and remediation, and now nobody's getting burnt out. So these types of tools can be very helpful in not only getting the work done, which is critical, but also identifying those who are going to be the next generation of security team members on the blue team or on the red team. The reason for this is that even the most complex attacks, they follow identifiable paths. Even if we're looking at an alarmingly complex attack like Sunburst, that follows specific paths. There are infiltration methodologies. In this case, it was through a third-party update server. That is very hard to detect, but there's also data exfiltration that, if the right technologies are brought to bear, can be simulated, can be tested for, can be observed if it's happening in the real production environment. And so even in these more complex attacks, If you bring in people with other skill sets like compliance, like infrastructure, like the blue team, to help with this offensive testing, it can be a very effective strategy for better protecting the organization without the need to find experienced red team cybersecurity professionals who may not exist. They may not be there right now. And because they follow these paths, and for the most part, we rarely see any new methodologies. We do see a lot of repurposed methodologies, but they're the ones we've seen before, so they can be tested for. They can be examined and explored and identified, and everybody can get better at spotting them if they were to be used by a real threat actor. And it doesn't need to be the sole responsibility of a small group of highly experienced red team offensive testers. Looking at open standards is a good way to do this, by the way. The MITRE ATT&CK framework is a great standard. I know it's very hard to read here, but if you go to just Google MITRE ATT&CK, you will find it. The MITRE ATT&CK framework talks about all the different ways that the industry has been seeing for performing offensive acts, whether that is breaking in, whether that is compromising devices, whether that is taking over databases or other data objects, whether that is removing stuff from the environment. It's all mapped out here. And so this can be used both as a training tool and a guide toward where you want to look for when you start doing testing. And this is readily available. The tools to actually test a lot of this are things that should be left either in the hands of experienced pros or using tools that can make them be able to be tested safely, like Cymulate and other continuous security validation platforms. But the methods that are used by threat actors, for the most part, are well documented by MITRE, by CIS, by NIST, by many different organizations, both within the United States and worldwide, so it's not just the US thing. And these can be very effective tools for plotting out how you're going to address your cybersecurity strategy, how you're going to focus everybody to test these things and reinforce these things and secure against these things. So don't think it's all third-party tools. Some of this stuff is open source and can be used safely. Some of it, like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, are a guide, and you'll need the right tools and people to make it into a testing procedure. Where we come in here at Cymulate, just for the last couple of minutes before we go to questions, we do end-to-end security validation. We do continuous security validation. And what that means is we have a series of modules referred to as vectors. That's these 11 circles that are in the main part of this slide. Each one either focuses on one set of security controls and tests against hundreds or thousands of different methods and techniques, or looks at one set of methods and techniques, but tests against all of the security controls that will be used to deflect or defend against that type of attack. And we cover everything from intelligence gathering with our recon vector to infiltration, looking at email gateway solutions that stop things from getting to a user's mailbox, web gateway that stops a user from downloading something they shouldn't or going to a site that they shouldn't, web app firewall for web applications and services and sites. Phishing awareness, if they're not going after technology, they're going after people, and we can simulate that kind of activity. Endpoint security, because they will need to at least partially compromise one device, whether that's a desktop or a server or a cloud instance, in order to start taking over things within the environment. Lateral movement, because they've got to find what they want to affect or remove, so they've got to move from machine to machine. And then data exfiltration. Are there things that are allowed to leave this organization that should not be allowed to leave the organization? So we could test all of that with hundreds and or thousands, depending on the module, of different methods and techniques that are used by threat actors, though again, this will be done safely, controlled, validly, but in a way that's not going to knock anything down or slow anything down. And we could use individual attacks from start to finish, again, safely, either created by Cymulate, those are the immediate threats intelligence module components, created by your team from building blocks, that's full kill chain, or for those of you that have experienced offensive cybersecurity professionals on your staff, purple team that allows them to pick individual tools and techniques. Now that last one, that is only for experienced folks because it can be disruptive or destructive if not used properly. We're very careful with it, but everything else you see on this slide is designed to be used by anyone with basic technology knowledge. And so it can be a very effective way to find new staff members who could be accelerated in their career growth, to teach them, because senior folks can create, for example, purple team templates that could be run by junior folks since they know what they're going to do. The junior folks get to see how these tools work and how they run, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got one of those solutions that can automate a lot of the repetitive tasks, allow people to focus on what they like doing, find the people who might have an aptitude and can be accelerated into this, et cetera. And we hope you'll give us a, stop by the booth, give us a call, let us know how we can help. So there were a few questions that came in. First off, do you see more targeted attacks against third parties? The answer is yes. The answer is absolutely yes. And Sunburst is a perfect example of that. They did not go after the government agencies. They did not go after the security control providers. They went after a third-party provider, SolarWinds, and infected the software. And then that software was downloaded and became part of the operational methodologies of thousands of companies. So third-party attacks are actually something that we see a lot. Do you have any recommendations for smaller institutions that have only 1 to 2 people? Yes, automate, 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 automate. Do it safely with the right tools, but you can do a tremendous amount of testing with a small number of people. And you can start to see if there are others within the organization who have the aptitude and who have the desire to go into this line of work. So even with a smaller group, you can automate a lot of things. You can get great data and metrics back, and you could start to see maybe there's somebody in another division who's really good at this and they've just never been given the chance. Would you say purple team is necessary to bridge communication gap between red and blue teams? It depends on the organization, to be brutally honest. In larger organizations, the line between red team and blue team is pretty solid, and there are reasons for that. In smaller and mid-size, bordering up on that enterprise size, you really do need that purple team. You need as many people as possible to be working on this, not just to bridge the communication gap, but because this is an all hands on deck scenario. So having rigidly separated red and blue teams means you're missing out on some of the things you could be looking for. So yes, you want a purple team to bridge communication gaps, but you also want a purple team because you need everybody to be contributing to this. DevSecOps promotes traditional security in an SDLC. What's your take on implementing cybersecurity control automation into CI/CD pilot? That one, I'm going to say we want to probably take that one offline and have a much deeper discussion with you. That is a much deeper conversation that we can't really accomplish in the couple of minutes we've got here. But Tanweer, we definitely want to have that discussion with you. So I'd encourage you to reach out and we could talk about that. But that's a whole seminar in and of itself. Before we log into our company site, we're required to log in. Endpoint protection with the LAN ID and password, right? Not sure whether it secures all internal information. So logins do not secure all internal information because you can have internal threat actors. So you want to be doing things like testing for the ability of a user to move onto machines that they shouldn't be on. That's lateral movement. And you want to see if they can exfiltrate, data exfiltration. So the answer to your question is that's a really good thing to have, and you should continue to do that. But you want to add in some testing for lateral movement and data exfiltration to make sure that the authenticated people can't do things that they're not supposed to do. Can you talk about the SolarWinds security issue? We touched on that briefly. The SolarWinds thing is called a supply chain attack or a watering hole attack. On this scale, they are exceedingly rare because most vendors do have a lot of different safety controls that prohibit this kind of thing from happening. We don't have all the details yet. I would reserve judgment until we do. Probably won't have the details for some time now. What I would say is follow the advice of all the cybersecurity pros that I've heard speak, which is turn off the SolarWinds systems for a little while. It's going to have an impact on your team. It's going to mean more work for people. It is unfortunate, but necessary. When we know what happened, we can have a much deeper analysis of it. But I would not care to speculate right now because we don't know how the threat actor gained access. We're not even 100% sure on who the threat actor was. It looks like APT39, but there's no proof yet. And I encourage everyone not to jump to conclusions. It is the most dangerous thing that can happen in our business. How would you implement MITRE ATT&CK to make it automated and easy? Okay, I promise this person was not a plant for Cymulate, but the answer is use a tool like Cymulate. The Cymulate tools have most of, if not all of, depending on which vectors you get, the MITRE ATT&CK framework built in. They can report on that. You could see how this attack lines up with these techniques and sub-techniques. So using a tool like Cymulate, and again, we're not the only ones, but we are probably the easiest one, at least in my humble opinion, that can help automate using the MITRE attack to test security with offensive methodologies safely. The most important thing to answer that question, though, is don't go it alone. And unless you have a good number of senior offensive specialists, use tools that are designed for safety first. Don't just go with an open source tool because it's either free or low cost, because that will expect that you have people who know what they should not touch or what they shouldn't try. So go with tools that are built to incorporate safety into the testing methodology, like Cymulate, and that is how you begin to bring MITRE and other standards, by the way, into active use within an organization that may not have really been looking at standards up until now. All right, I think that was all the questions. Yep, that was all the questions. So, Jason, you want to talk about what we're going to do now?
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, that was extremely thorough. And thank you, everybody, for fielding those questions into Mike. I hope all of your questions were obviously answered.